You are not bad with money. The system is just very, very good at taking it. Think about that for a second. You earn more than your parents did. You work just as hard, maybe harder, and yet you live in a smaller apartment, carry more debt, and have less saved. That is not a coincidence. That is a design. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Today, we are going to walk through exactly how this happened. From the promise you were sold as a kid, to the paycheck that never quite covers it, to the rent that swallows everything, to the bills that keep multiplying, to the cycle that was built to trap you, and the people who built it. By the end of this video, you will understand something that most people spend their entire lives too exhausted to figure out. Here is what they told every American kid. Work hard, get a good education, and you will build a comfortable life. That was the deal. The American dream, a steady job, a house, a family, maybe a vacation once a year. A life where one income was enough to actually live on. And for a short window, the 1950s through the mid-1970s, that deal was actually real. From the end of World War II through about 1979, worker productivity rose and wages rose right along with it. The middle class genuinely expanded. A factory worker could own a home and put two kids through college. A waitress could retire with dignity. One income was not just enough. It was actually building something. Then around 1979, something broke. Worker productivity kept climbing. It has gone up 87% since then, but the typical worker's paycheck? Up just 33% over that same period. The extra value that workers created did not flow back to them. It flowed upward, to shareholders, to executives, to asset owners. That gap between what workers produce and what they get paid became the financial fault line that every other part of this story runs along. But they never changed the promise. They just kept selling it. And an entire generation, then another, kept buying in. So you did everything right. You went to college. And here is where the first trap closes on you. Between 1973 and 2025, tuition and fees at public four-year universities increased by over 220%. Private universities, up over 200%. Meanwhile, wages for people with bachelor's degrees rose just 5% in real terms between 2000 and 2020. You took on tens of thousands of dollars in student loans chasing a credential that was supposed to guarantee financial security. And by the time you graduated, the credential cost more and paid less. The average American earned roughly $63,795 in 2025. That sounds reasonable until you look at what it actually buys. Federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, Medicare. By the time the paycheck hits your account, you have already lost 25 to 30 cents of every dollar you earn. The paycheck is the starting gun of a race you are already running behind in. And here's the thing nobody talks about at the kitchen table. Between 1979 and 2017, the compensation of median workers trailed economy-wide productivity growth by roughly 43%. Three-quarters of that gap was engineered through deliberate policy decisions that weakened unions, suppressed minimum wage increases, and handed more power to corporations than to the people who actually showed up and did the work. The Economic Policy Institute called it a failure by design. And when the paycheck still is not enough, you are told to pick up a side hustle, deliver food, drive strangers around, freelance on the weekend. But here is the bitter irony. The gig economy was not built to give you freedom. It was built to give corporations a workforce with zero benefits, zero job security, and zero accountability, while making you feel like an entrepreneur. You are not building something. You are plugging a hole that the wage gap created. You did not earn less because you worked less. You earned less because the rules were rewritten while you were busy working. Now you have your paycheck, and before you do anything else, anything at all, you have to pay rent. Since April 2020, the monthly cost of renting a typical apartment in the United States has climbed 28.7%, bringing the average rent to $1,858 a month. If you are renting a single-family home, you are looking at an average of $2,256 a month. Median household income over that same period grew just 22.5%. Rent ran laps around wages. According to research from Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies, Nearly 65% of working-age renters find it difficult to manage basic expenses after paying their rent. Not luxury expenses, basic ones. Groceries, utilities, transportation. The study found that respondents spent an average of $18,230 a year on rent and $57,340 on other essential expenses, a combined total that significantly exceeds the national median annual salary of $62,192. Let that land. The cost of simply being alive, before any savings, before any emergency fund, before any semblance of a normal life, already exceeds what most Americans make in a year. And home ownership, the thing that was supposed to be the long-term solution? The typical first-time buyer is now 38 years old, a full decade older than buyers in the 1980s. From 1960 to today, the share of 30-year-olds who own a home and are married has collapsed from 52% down to just 12%. Just 26% of Gen Z own their home. The United States is short 3.8 million housing units, and the homes being built are not the affordable starter homes that working families need. They are high-end units optimized for developer profit. You cannot save enough to buy because your rent keeps rising, and your rent keeps rising partly because not enough homes were built, and not enough homes were built because of decades of zoning laws and policy choices that protected existing homeowners' property values at the direct expense of every generation that came after them. Someone designed this. Someone benefits from it. So you have your paycheck, you paid your rent, and now the rest of the bills line up. Healthcare costs for the average American increased 6.7% in 2025 alone, rising to $7,871 per person per year. For a family of four, the annual cost of employer-sponsored healthcare hit $35,119, nearly triple what it cost in 2005. Between 2005 and 2025, healthcare costs rose 188%. Wages over that same period rose just 84%. Every single year, a bigger slice of your paycheck disappears before you even open a grocery app. Then there are the subscriptions. The average American spends $219 a month on subscriptions, roughly $2,628 a year, but thinks they are spending only around $86 a month. That gap is not a budgeting failure. That is a business model. Companies have spent billions engineering automatic renewals, dark patterns, and frictionless charges specifically designed to make you forget you are paying. More than 85% of consumers have at least one unused subscription silently draining their account right now. Then there are the hidden fees. Americans lose around $3,200 every single year to junk fees buried inside everyday transactions. Restaurant bills, utility payments, travel bookings, basic banking charges. A Groundwork Collaborative report put the total cost of what they call the annoyance economy, the money and time drained by deliberate corporate friction, at $165 billion a year. One study found that making it harder to cancel a subscription alone can boost corporate revenues by over 200%. You have a job, you have a paycheck, you have an apartment, and the bills still come faster than the income does. So what do most Americans do when the bills outrun the paycheck? They reach for the card. Total credit card debt in the United States hit $1.39 trillion in 2025. The average household carries roughly $11,500 in credit card debt. Credit card interest rates are hovering around 24%. At that rate, if you are making only minimum payments on a $5,000 balance, you will pay back over $10,000, and it will take you more than a decade to close it. Here is the part that should make you genuinely angry. The bank already knew that when they handed you the card. This is not a flaw in the financial system. It is a feature of it. J.P. Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo collectively control 40% of American banking. The same institution that holds your checking account is issuing your credit card, packaging your debt into securities, and selling it to investors. By the time you are lying awake worrying about making the minimum payment, the bank has already been paid 6 different ways. But it does not stop at credit cards. Total household debt in the U.S. reached $18.9 trillion by the end of 2025. The typical American household is carrying $154,152 in debt. Millennials alone average $132,280. Gen X averages $158,105. And yet 59% of Americans in 2025 do not have enough savings to cover a single $1,000 emergency expense. As of early 2026, 29% of Americans cannot even cover a $400 unexpected bill. This is the cycle. You earn. The bills take it. You borrow to close the gap. The interest grows. You earn more next year. The bills grow faster. And the debt is always waiting. None of this happened by accident. This is the part they never put in a classroom. Consumer spending drives roughly 70% of the U.S. economy. Corporations are not passive participants in this system. They are its architects. Every decision, from how debt products are structured to how subscription fees are buried, from how advertising algorithms are calibrated to how healthcare costs are passed on to workers rather than absorbed by shareholders, has been engineered to maximize extraction from the people doing the spending. The Economic Policy Institute documented that three factors alone: excessive unemployment used to suppress wages, the deliberate erosion of collective bargaining, and corporate-driven globalization account for 55% of the gap between productivity and median worker pay. Corporations lobbied aggressively for those conditions. They spent decades and hundreds of millions of dollars in Washington making sure the rules stayed tilted in their favor. Meanwhile, the number of Americans in unions collapsed from roughly 35% in the 1950s to around 10% today. And with it, the most powerful tool workers ever had to push back. And the gap that resulted is staggering. As of the third quarter of 2025, the wealthiest 1% of Americans hold 31.7% of total household wealth, the highest share recorded since 1989. The top 1% now collectively control about $55 trillion, nearly equaling the entire wealth of the bottom 90% combined. The bottom 50% of Americans? They hold just 2.5% of the nation's total wealth. Since the pandemic, the richest 0.1% have nearly doubled their total wealth to over $23 trillion. In that same period, 49% of Americans said they could no longer afford a night out to dinner. More than half said healthcare was out of their price range. The productivity of the American worker built that $55 trillion. It just did not go to the people who did the building. Here is what all of this adds up to in plain terms. About 24% of U.S. households are currently living paycheck to paycheck, spending over 95% of their income on basic necessities, with nothing left for savings, emergencies, or any kind of financial cushion. A majority of Americans, 57%, describe their personal finances as only fair or poor. Fewer than 3 in 10 adults say they can actually get ahead financially. Even most six-figure earners say they feel like they are just treading water, maintaining their standard of living, not improving it. The American dream was not just a cultural slogan, it was a mathematical possibility, a system where sustained effort actually translated into financial stability and upward mobility over time. That math stopped working around 1979, and since then, each generation has been handed a shinier version of the same broken promise, told to work harder, budget smarter, cancel the streaming service, while the structural conditions that actually determine financial outcomes quietly move further and further out of reach. You are not broke because you failed the system. In most cases, the system worked exactly as designed. It extracted what it could and left the rest for the bills. The question now is, what do you do with that information? Because here is the one thing the system genuinely cannot take from you: awareness. Once you understand how the trap was built, you can start making decisions that deliberately push against it. You stop competing on their terms. You stop borrowing to buy things that lose value the moment you buy them. You stop treating every paycheck like an open invitation to spend and start treating it like the single most important resource under your control. The gap is real. The design is real. The people who benefit from keeping you in it are very real. But so is your ability to see it clearly and choose differently. So, does this feel like your life right now? Drop your situation in the comments. Tell me how many bills hit before your next paycheck, because I genuinely want to know how many people this is actually happening to. If this video changed how you see the system, share it with someone who is still blaming themselves for something that was never their fault to begin with. Hit like if you are tired of being told this economy is fair, and subscribe, because every single week we pull back the curtain on exactly how money works in America and how to stop letting the system bleed you dry.